News broken just yesterday by Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger over on their Substacks at Public and Racket, both great publications. This is a huge development, I think, and we're going to learn more about it. It seems like as the week goes on. Ryan, I'm super curious to get your reaction to the news they broke. Here's the crux of it. According to multiple U.S. government officials interviewed as part of a lengthy investigation by Public and Racket, the first people infected by the virus, by COVID-19, patients 0, included Ben Hu, a researcher who led the Wuhan Institute of Virology's gain-of-function research on SARS-like coronaviruses, which increases the infectiousness of the viruses. Sources within the U.S. government say that 3 of the earliest people to become infected with SARS-CoV-2 were Ben Hu, Yu Ping, and Yan Zhu, all members of the Wuhan lab expected to have leaked the pandemic virus. They were working with the closest relatives of SARS-CoV-2 and inserting gain-of-function features unique to it. You followed this story really closely. The Intercept has done some of the best reporting on the potential for the lab leak. What do you make of the scoop here from Schellenberger and Taibbi?
Yeah, it was nice of them to credit us with some of that reporting in their piece. And I want to shade my comments here for people who don't regularly watch the show, because I think people who normally do probably have a lot of this context and probably already trust both Matt Taibbi and or Michael Schellenberger. There's an enormous number of people who don't, and I've had my debates with Schellenberger, and I think he's an interesting person to engage with, but I'm not going to take what he says as like gospel. So let's start from that perspective, but go through what he found. So they have government sources that are saying that the 3 people that were infected in November 2019 were Ben Hu, Yu Ping, and Yan Zhu. And like you said, Ben Hu is kind of the top protege of a woman who ran the WIV. And if it can be confirmed that Ben Hu was the first or among the first people infected, that is a game changer.
Smoking gun.
Now, there's a lot of reason now, and this is back to the people who might have some skepticism. There's a lot of reason to believe that this is true. One is that in May of 2021, the Wall Street Journal reported that according to U.S. intelligence sources, 3 Wuhan lab workers were sickened in November 2019. So we have known at least that the intelligence community believed that to be a fact since May 2021. If you look at the timeline and if you look at the source, the Wall Street Journal, Murdoch paper, it seems possible that those are Trump administration officials, who had access to that information. And even though they were out of office by January 2021, May is close enough that they may have been the sources of this information. And so the left then, Democrats, are going to have some skepticism about that. But we do know that there were intelligence reports at the time that said 3 workers. Now, were those workers that picked it up at, say, the wet market and then came to work and just, COVID was everywhere in Wuhan, not just at the wet market. And so there were still those questions outstanding. If it turns out, now the wet market was January and February, December, January, February, that there was this outbreak there, so November doesn't make sense. You can't go back in time. However, let's say that it was already spreading in November. It depends who those workers are. If it's confirmed that it was these 3 workers who were working directly on the SARS-like chimeric viruses, that's a huge development and really backs up all of that previous reporting. The other key point, I think, and good on Schellenberger for including this, he and Taibbi wrote that other news outlets have been circling this.
Yes.
And we often, as reporters, it's called hearing footsteps in the business. We hear footsteps, and sometimes you move your pieces a little bit further because you hear those footsteps. Usually reporters don't include that, but I like the transparency of that. Because now we're going to find out, okay, is that true? And can these other outlets, the Times of London, by the way, has done some really interesting reporting on this.
Right.
Can those other outlets land this same scoop? Because there is going to be soon testimony that the administration is giving to Congress. There are other reports that are supposed to be coming. And Schellenberger and Taibbi are shining a spotlight on those. So are they going to come out? So I think if you're somebody who's super skeptical of both Taibbi and Schellenberger, You can just wait a couple days.
Couple days.
Because they have kind of put out on the line like this. We believe that this isn't the last you'll hear about this.
Yes. So they have a source, they say, who was asked how certain they were that these were the identities of the 3 Wuhan Institute of Virology scientists who developed symptoms consistent with COVID-19 in the fall of 2019. When they asked, we were told, quote, 100%. Another thing to note from the report from Matt, Mike, and then Alex Gutentag, the third reporter on the byline, is next week the DNI is expected to release previously classified material, which may include the names of the 3 scientists who were the likely among the first to be sickened by SARS-CoV-2. So keep that in mind, that they expect, based on their reporting, the Director of National Intelligence next week to release a report that actually names the 3 scientists involved. They also have a source saying they're 100% certain those are the 3 scientists. And the Times of London quotes an anonymous U.S. State Department investigator. This was on Saturday. Quote, it has been increasingly clear that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was involved in the creation, promulgation, and cover-up of the COVID-19 pandemic. One thing I like about their report is they're onto a similar line that we've talked about a little bit, which is why do you have Anthony Fauci continuing to sort of try with Francis Collins to steer the media's and the public's attention away from the EcoHealth Alliance grant? Why do you have them trying to discredit the lab leak theory when, for instance, the United States government really does see China as a hostile foreign adversary, especially the Trump administration? There's no, it wasn't as though he was really soft and easy on China and never really missed a rhetorical opportunity to bluster for the most part. Right. So why would they step away from that? Well, because if we can establish these connections to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which look very, very clear at this point. They quote an expert saying the Ben Hu thing is a real smoking gun. I completely agree with that. And if you establish that connection, then, man, it's bad for the United States government because it looks like we may have had a role in funding it, in funding research that was being done sloppily without proper oversight. They show a video actually from the Wuhan Institute of Virology and I think Ben Hu actually in the Public and Racket report from Chinese state media before the pandemic where nobody is wearing proper protective gear.
Right, they're just, you can watch the video at that public post and they're just messing around with vials, without even the poor protection like goggles and a thin mask, not even that.
And so if you can imagine being, for instance, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State, Donald Trump, President, Trump administration in general, sort of being opposed to the permanent bureaucratic state at places like the NIH and the people like Anthony Fauci over the course of your presidency and getting intelligence reports like we know at this point, the CIA, Mike Pompeo, the State Department, they seem to have known since the very beginning. And Pompeo would say this, it was always been clear through the intelligence that the lab leak was plausible, if not likely. And imagine you're getting those briefings, you're Trump and you're Pompeo or whomever else, and you're the one that's overseeing Fauci, and you realize that he may be invested in some sort of cover up just to cover his own butt because there was our money, taxpayer money, was being sent over there without any oversight at all, basically, and could have been involved in a leak from the lab because there was no oversight.
Yeah, and ideologically, too, Fauci's a huge champion of gain-of-function research and it pushed back against the pause. Last point, the Public Racket article includes comments from Alina Chan, who we've had on this, who we've had on our show, is one of the first and most prominent kind of skeptics of the natural origin theory, wrote a book on it. And so I think for people who are curious about this, I think her kind of validation of this story, I think, is important.
Absolutely.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.